This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. The Browns have an opportunity to do something on Sunday that I feel like not enough people have been discussing. And it's something that I do think would be important, not necessarily for the consequences that will happen if you do win the game, but for what it means for this franchise and for this fan base, especially given what they've been through since 1999, it's something worth talking about. And what that is a 12th win. Now, to some people, a 12th win is purely sentimental. It's not worth risking a single soul, and it's not a conversation even remotely worth having. And for those people, I understand where you're coming from. It's a very strictly results-based way of thinking, but sports, in my opinion, is not where it is today as far as the size and the amount of people who care about sports strictly off of logic. Sports is a big deal because it kind of doesn't make sense, right? At the end of the day, it's thousands of people sitting in a stadium watching people fight over a ball. That's what sports usually boils down to. It's not something that makes a ton of logical sense. It is a bunch of man-made obstacles being put in the way of people, and we want to see how those people kind of overcome those obstacles. There is no functional reason for all of this stuff to exist. There's no logical reason for all of it to exist, but you put it together, you slap some uniforms on, you put a name of a city on, attach that uniform into that team, and you tell people that this is your team, and then all of a sudden it means something, because sports, as logical as you can be about sports, are ultimately an emotional endeavor, and things that are emotional aren't necessarily logical, right? There is an inherent emotionality about these things, and the Browns winning 12 games is something that I do think means something. It means something for this franchise. It means something for the fan base. Now, again, I'm not saying play Joe Flacco and risk everybody getting injured in order to get this 12th game, but I do think if you get that 12th game, however it happens that you get it, it does mean something. And the reason I think it means something goes back to the origins of this team. And in order to talk about it, I kind of have to give a history lesson on the very early history of the Cleveland Browns, something that me, even as a fan, my whole life, I don't feel like has sufficiently been done. So I'm going to try to broach it a little bit. Now, the Cleveland Browns originate from the AAFC, the All-American Football Conference. A lot of people get this confused with the AFL. This is a competitor to the NFL that existed well before that. This is probably the NFL's first competitor. This is all the way back in the 1940s, back when the NFL was a 10-team league, and the 10 teams were the Chicago Bears, the LA Rams, the Green Bay Packers, the Philadelphia Eagles, the New York Giants, Washington Football Team, the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Chicago Cardinals, who I believe eventually turned into the Arizona Cardinals, and the Boston Yanks, who, trivia question, if you get this, turned into the Indianapolis Colts, which gets even more confusing when I tell you that the Browns originated from the All-American Football Conference, which was a 8-team league. Now, 3 of those teams became NFL franchises: the Cleveland Browns and the San Francisco 49ers. Those are the ones you know. Another team became an NFL franchise, the Baltimore Colts. Now, what makes this interesting is that the Baltimore Colts that was picked up from the AAFC into the NFL went defunct in like 3 years and never came back. But when they moved the Colts to Baltimore, or the Boston Yanks from like New York and all these other places. The Boston Yanks moved around. They eventually moved that franchise to Baltimore. They needed a team name for it. They're like, hey, well, let's just call them the Baltimore Colts. And then that's how the Colts have been born. But who would have thought Baltimore would have a more confusing football history when it comes to franchises and which teams are renamed after what than Cleveland? But that's a fun fact. Baltimore has actually had a weirder franchise history, because then that Baltimore Colts team got stolen to Indy, and then they stole the Browns, and now they're the Ravens. So fun story about that, right? But that's the environment in where the Browns were born in, right? They were born in the AAFC. They dominated the AAFC, so much so that when the AAFC folded, they were one of the few teams that got turned into NFL franchises. Now, this was controversial at the time. People didn't feel like the AAFC was as serious of a league as the NFL. You would have to imagine it was like, what if the NFL merged with the XFL at the time, and then they brought in the St. Louis Battlehawks, and people are talking about the Battlehawks being a good team because this and that. And then what happened was the Browns played the Eagles, the NFL champion. They were the AAFC champion at the time. They played the NFL champion, and the Browns not only beat the Eagles, but then turned into an NFL dynasty, right? This is where a lot of the Browns lore comes in. See, in the Browns' first 10 years, 10 seasons as a NFL, as just a football team in general, in their first 10 seasons, they went to 10 championship games. They dominated the AAFC, moved to the NFL, and then dominated the NFL. And that's how the Browns became NFL royalty, despite not being an original NFL team. They joined in the 1940s, and then they dominated the league well into the 1950s. There's a fun fact / misperception of the Cleveland Browns. I feel like this is as close to a retcon as you can get in pro sports, but it feels like the Browns' lack of success from like 2004 to 2017 was so damaging that it kind of retconned what people thought the Cleveland Browns were before they moved in 1995. Because if you ask anybody who wasn't around during that era, or who's like my age or a little bit older, and ask them, hey, what was the Browns' reputation in the 90s? They would probably kind of lazily default to, oh, they were probably the same old Browns, LOL. They were always kind of miserable and stunk. But that's not remotely true. The Browns, before they were stolen to Baltimore because of Art Modell's horrible management of the team, before that happened, they were like a model franchise. I mean, they only had 5 last place finishes. This is from 1950 to 1995. The Browns had 5 last place finishes in that time period, and they had 19 first place finishes. They had an overall record of 364 to 264. So over 100 games over 500. And they only had 8 losing seasons from 1950 to 1995. 19 first place finishes again, 5 last place finishes from a 45-year time span, basically. Now, again, if you're wondering where the Browns reputation comes from, it's relatively new. It's not something that's always been with the franchise. The Browns didn't really have these long periods of stinking. Like, sure, they would put together a couple of back-to-back years of 4-12 or 5-11 football, but they would always bounce back to 500 and get over 500 and make the playoffs sooner than later. The Browns were always able to kind of bounce back. Now, they never reclaimed the glory that they had in the early 50s when they joined the NFL. That kind of built them as a dynasty, but they were always a respectable franchise pre-1995. Where this reputation got forever sullied was when the team was reactivated in 99 with an expansion roster. And basically, I would say from 2003 to 2017 was the single most damaging era for the Cleveland Browns ever. I believe they had 2 seasons where they didn't finish in last place, 1 season in that time span where they finished over 500. And as much good as the first 45 years of Browns history did for their reputation, this little stretch of 14 years did impossible to measure damage to the Cleveland Browns as a franchise and as a brand. It's a hole that the Cleveland Browns still try to dig themselves out of. And when you think of the history, the total history of the Cleveland Browns, to think that most of the negative stuff that you hear about the Cleveland Browns has only been built a reputation that's been started from 2003 to 2017, it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing, right? But that era from 2003 to 2017, probably the most damaging era to the Cleveland Browns. And it's still a reputation that the Browns are still trying to build themselves out of. And let's be honest, probably going to take 10 years of winning football to get out of that funk, right? Because that was such a damaging run. And to compound that damage, the rest of the AFC North was not only good, they were championship contenders during that period. And also to compound that damage, you were kind of not the Browns because more people associated Baltimore with the history of the Cleveland Browns at that point than the Cleveland Browns, because they were told that the Browns were this expansion franchise that technically kept their team instead of what actually happened, which was they were a deactivated franchise that was activated and drafted through an expansion draft. It was just a mess, right? Like the Browns' reputation had never been lower than what it was in 2003 to 2017. And now the Browns have a chance in 2023, 2024, to win 12 games. Something that the Browns have only done once in the NFL and 3 times in the AFC, but once in the NFL. They've only won 12 games once in the NFL. That was in 1986. So in a way, getting back to that 12 win mark is a step towards getting back to that reputation of the old Browns, of the real Browns, not the 2003 to 2017 Browns. That would be a big step in making people feel that. And when you're trying to dig yourself out of the funk of that 14-year run that you had, where you weren't just an embarrassment, you were a hilariously popular embarrassment, every win kind of counts to dig yourself out of that, because you can look at an 11-win season and go, that's fun. You look at a 12-win season and you go, now that's serious. That's something I have to take. It's serious. So winning 12 games for the Cleveland Browns is a matter of perception. But the Browns are still fighting a battle of perception, and that's a battle that matters to the people who cheer for this team. How this team is perceived matters to the people who cheer for it. So yes, I do think winning a 12 game matters, because it goes back to getting this team closer to the history that truly belongs to be associated with Cleveland, and instead of being kind of stained by the history of a team that was recovering from being stolen, which is what happened in 2003 to 2017. But that's my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Everybody have a great day. Have a better night. Peace.